Always trust.
We ask the question, what is needed in the world?
Govor koji je u Minhenu održao američki potpredsjednik J.D. Vance simbol je dalekosežnog zaokreta koji promiče američki predsjednik Donald Trump. Pred publikom koja je očekivala pojašnjenja pozicije Washingtona o ruskoj agresiji na Ukrajinu, potpredsjednik Vance je odlučio pokrenuti veliki ideološki napad na evropske demokratije, podržavajući stavove krajnje desnice. Njegov govor izazvao je živahan i ogorčen odgovor evropskih čelnika. Transatlantski odnosi imali su i druge niske tačke nakon 1945. godine. Američka invazija Iraka izazvala je značajan raskol. Zemlje poput Njemačke i Francuske su se čvrsto protivile, a velika većina evropskih društava bila je ogorčena. Prvi mandat Donalda Trumpa također je bio komplikovan period, ali drugi mandat ima obilježja bez presedana u 8 desetljeća. Otkako je Rusija pokrenula invaziju na susjednu Ukrajinu u februaru 2022. godine, na starom kontinentu vlada zabrinutost da bi apetiti ruskog predsjednika Vladimira Putina mogli porasti, a da bi njegova ratna mašinerija mogla produžiti i van granica prve mete. Milijarde dolara vrijedne vojne pomoći upućene Kijevu jasno govori da Europa ne želi prelijevanje vojnih sukoba van granica te zemlje. Potezi administracije američkog predsjednika Donalda Trumpa su uzdrmali geopolitički pejzaž, a evropski lideri su organizovali nedavno summit u Londonu jer su svjesni da bi Europa mogla biti prepuštena sama sebi u slučaju budućeg sukoba sa Rusijom. Sve su češći izvještaji o ruskom hibridnom djelovanju i sabotažama širom Evropske unije. Bivši ministar odbrane Tobias Ellwood upozorio je na nedostatak spremnosti Ujedinjenog kraljevstva za rat. Ellwood je naglasio da svijet ima osjećaj iz 1939. godine, te da Britanija nije adekvatno opremljena za suočavanje sa izazovima koji dolaze. O stanju britanske vojske, evropskoj sigurnosnoj arhitekturi, ratu u Ukrajini i transatlantskim odnosima za Al Jazeera govori bivši ministar odbrane Tobias Ellwood.
Mr. Ellwood, hello and welcome to Al Jazeera, and thank you so much for taking time to speak to us. So let me start with a meeting that will most likely remain a defining moment in America's relations with Ukraine, the Oval Office meeting between President Donald Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky. How did you feel watching that meeting?
I was very saddened. I don't think that any guest to the Oval Office is seen as hallowed ground, if you like, as to where so many American presidents conduct their business in the past, where diplomacy, the art of diplomacy unfolds, that we should see the leader of the free world treat a guest in this way. And to see America now splinter into two groups, really down the middle, of Republicans expecting to row in behind Donald Trump, to say, actually, it was Zelensky who was rude, and the other half, and indeed I think much of the world, saying, actually was Donald Trump was impertinent. He was the one that was placing demands on Zelensky. The fact that we had to see this unfold and the wider ramifications as to where our world is going, that we see the American position 180 degrees turn from supportive of a democracy under threat in Europe to one supportive of the aggressor, the adversary in Europe. And we haven't really got our heads around this yet. I was at the Munich Security Conference. I've just come back from Ukraine. And when you piece together not just what happened in the Oval Office, but also J.D. Vance criticizing Europe, a few weeks ago, seems a long time ago now, in Munich. When you see America vote against Ukraine, but vote with Belarus, North Korea, Russia, and then you see this changing narrative in Washington, D.C., blaming blaming Ukraine, not Russia, for the actual invasion itself, calling Zelensky a dictator. When you piece all that together, there are some really dark implications as to where Donald Trump might be taking America.
Right. Now, Mr. Ellwood, European leaders met with President Zelensky in London and reaffirmed their support for Ukraine. Does the EU and Great Britain have the resources, the capacity and the will to continue arming Ukraine And can Ukraine defend itself solely relying on European arms?
So this is the fundamental question that we face now. If America is dialing back, removing its security interests in Europe, if America is choosing to side with Russia instead of Ukraine, can Europe go it alone? And what is galvanizing views here is what happens if we don't? Because what does Russia do? Where will Putin go if we appease his actions? He will be allowed to rearm, regroup, and then attack further down the road. So a bigger conflict is likely. And that is what's focusing minds in capital cities in Europe, is the fact that we actually have no choice. Ukraine is doing the fighting for us right now. And if we don't support Ukraine in the absence of America, this could get worse indeed. Mm-hmm. And the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, spelled that out in the House of Commons yesterday by saying, actually, Russia is attacking us, Great Britain, every single day. Cyber attacks take place, coercion. We've had assassinations on British soil, disinformation. There's a grey zone war taking place. We've had cables, undersea cables on the English Channel, being cut deliberately to cause economic harm and sow political discord. That is where Europe is going right now. And we so want to remain working with America. But if America is not here, we've got to go it alone.
Right. Let's look at things from a broader perspective. The concept of a fragile global order dominated by regional superpowers with defined spheres of influence has gained traction in recent times. Do you think this trajectory risks weakening the foundations of international laws and institutions in favor of sovereign dominance?
Yes, I think you summarize it very well. Our world order, the international rules-based order, as it's called, as we set up in 1945, is looking very fragile indeed. The United Nations Security Council, designed to keep security, keep the world secure, is paralyzed. The World Trade Organization can't reconcile with disputes when it comes to trade. And the World Health Organization no longer has any clout as well. So these big structural pillars that keep our world safe and secure and working together are falling apart. And as you imply in your question, we now see Donald Trump's perspective treating the world like a huge jungle with big beasts, alpha males, if you like, each with their sphere of influence. Russia, China, America. And America's sphere of influence includes Panama, includes Greenland, includes Canada, absolutely. And Russia's sphere of influence includes Ukraine. And so America is saying, fine, I respect Russia, I respect China, and I'm not going to touch on their areas. That's why I'm backing away and actually giving up on Ukraine. Big questions, therefore. But what Europe then does, if that is Donald Trump's geopolitical approach to global security?
Well, that was exactly my next question. So this will if this perspective solidifies, how might global power dynamics evolve, particularly in regions where Russia has irredentist aspirations, such as Georgia, Ukraine, but also some analysts will argue Kazakhstan, and how might it impact China's ambitions, and how might it impact, East European autocrats such as Serbia's president Alexander Vučić?
Well, you mentioned Serbia, Georgia, and so on. You could add to that also Slovakia. There are many countries. Hungary is already there, as is Turkey as well. Many countries that have already decided, actually, Russia is as strong as ever. Putin is the most powerful leader in Europe. I'm not going to sit with the Western Europe. I'm not going to sit with the EU and support them, support what NATO is doing. I'm in the backyard of Russia. I'm just going to work with President Putin. And that, unfortunately, is where we're going. And it's partly brought on by our own approach to this. We should have put this fire out in Ukraine a couple of years ago. Had we had the sense of resolve that we're now seeing in Europe to increase defense spending to support Ukraine, perhaps it could have been put out some time ago. But instead, we are seeing our world splinter into two spheres of influence, the West versus this axis, disruptive axis of Russia, China, and Iran and others, and then many countries in the global south choosing to align themselves with China increasingly. And now, if the world's splintering into two, it's splintering even further with a breakdown in vision between America and Europe. So we are absolutely moving to a very dangerous place. We're moving to a world of conflict, a World War III, but a world where there are multiple wars, many of them proxies, multiple conflicts taking place, many of them in the gray zone as well, because there's an absence of rules anymore. The referee has disappeared off the pitch, and it's everybody for their own.
Right. What kind of a relationship does the United Kingdom want with such a United States led by the Trump administration?
Well, this has been really interesting to see because we've had it easy for the last 30 years. I think this is the perhaps wake-up call that Europe is now at a crossroads. We are requiring a new European defense architecture like we've never seen for, since the end of the Cold War. So these are testing times. And I was very pleased to see our Prime Minister step forward, speak for the nation and say, Britain will stand with Ukraine. We will stand to defend democracy, and we call on other nations to join us. A coalition of the willing, with those principles in mind to support Ukraine, that Ukraine's interests are at the table when if a deal comes about, that Britain will put boots on the ground as well to defend the democracy. We will not do what happened in 1938 and cede land to the adversary, knowing that that will simply delay a wider conflict further down the road.
Right. But do you agree with President Trump's proposal that European Union countries which are financially well off should in fact be spending much more on their defense than even the proposed 2% or 2.5% by NATO?
Yes. I mean, this is one thing that he got right. I met President Trump when he was in the UK, during his first period in office, and he made that case to me. And I said, I'm one of many calling for an increase in UK defense spending. But you're right, Europe has had it easy. And because there's been no threat, no pressure, there's been no desire to increase defense spending at all. And America has invested a lot of money. There's no doubt about that. But to extend that argument, it's in America's interest for Europe to remain strong. Because as we go back to what we've just been saying, if our world is splintering, if Russia and China are uniting together to reinterpret global rules for their advantage, then you don't want Europe distracted by what's going on in Russia. You want Europe to be able to support America and this wider geopolitical challenge of dealing with the rise of China, because ultimately that will be the big battle, if you like, psychological or geopolitical battle of the 21st century. China is challenging America militarily, economically, technologically for America's dominance in these areas. And in our lifetimes, those will change. It could be that China becomes more powerful. And will that handover of power, of influence, be a peaceful one? Or will it lead to war? And these are the big questions that we now face. From a global perspective, we've moved into a new era of insecurity. Right.
So you do agree that Europe has been living, the peace dividend, and now it's going through a very rude awakening.
Yes, absolutely right. And so Donald Trump has been right on that one, and we've been slow to listen. Many of us who have been involved in defense up front have been calling for this some time. And it's now, good to see Britain saying we're going to put troops on the ground and so on. We would struggle now. Our stockpiles are very, very low, and Army, Air Force, and Navy are too small. In the end of the Cold War, we had 5 divisions available. We now have less than 1, really. We had 50 frigates and destroyers. I think we have about 10 today. We had 36 fast jet squadrons. We only have 6 today. So you can see how, just on the practical aspects, the air, land, and sea assets have diminished. But I stress it's also that gray zone. It's these other areas in which we are now vulnerable because of our whole reliance on the movement of the digital world.
Right. So that was exactly my next question. So what are the key areas, such as troop readiness, budget allocation, and reliance on strategic technologies that require attention to fill gaps left by, reduced spending in UK's defense sector?
Yeah, so there's the basic traditional areas that we need to bolster, as I just said, in Army, Air Force, and Navy. But we also need to look at these other aspects of modern warfare, namely how vulnerable we are from a cyber capability to be intruded in this way. Britain has no air defense as well. We need to look at that. Our ballistic missiles are not in a good place either. Intelligence gathering needs to be improved, although we do quite well on that. And then there's the space allocation, how vulnerable we are from that perspective too. So much needs to be done. And we're conducting a defense review as we speak. It's about to be announced in the next few weeks. Mm-hmm. I suspect, though, that the authors of that are rewriting things as we speak, quite shocked by the speed in which the transatlantic relationship is being rewritten.
Yeah, there have been suggestions by various intelligence experts and ex-CIA officers that UK might want to reconsider sharing its intelligence with the United States. Do you think this is a bit too far-fetched at this moment?
Yeah, I think we need to remain calm and recognize that at the moment this is Donald Trump. This is Trump doctrine that is treating the world in this way and ignoring where America usually sits in its desire for peace across the world and supporting other democracies, working well with Europe and so forth. This is very much Donald Trump. And I know that because I've spoken to senior Republicans who are actually embarrassed about this. But at the moment, there is no voice on the Republican side. They dare not criticize the president. And the Democrats haven't regrouped yet since the bruising of the election. But I suspect we will see big changes in 2 years' time when there are the midterm elections. But for now, Donald Trump is taking America into a place it's not been before, into a much more isolationist world, but at a very, very dangerous time indeed.
Right. Now, as we move towards the end of our interview, let me ask you, we have seen how emerging technologies are reshaping the battlefield, and some analysts argue that certain nations' innovations, such as advancement in UAVs, could play a pivotal role in Europe's defense strategies. How can Europe better integrate these contributions into its broader security framework? And is more cooperation with countries such as Turkey a good idea, bearing in mind the huge strides they've made in UAV technology?
Yes, there's no doubt about it that the way UAVs is removing the individual, the human being from the battlefield is absolutely rewriting how battles are conducted and the scale as well, the mass scale that's taking place. You go to Ukraine and you see this, but you see also the old and the new. You see there's battle trenches that are reminiscent of the First World War. Yeah. There are tank battles reminiscent of the Second World War. And then you have this gunfight that's taking place in the air, but no humans involved other than from afar. So it very much is a change in the way we actually fight and the way we defend ourselves as well. So an awful lot of question marks. Ultimately, it's going to require, I think, more than 3% GDP increase in defense spending, not just from Britain, but from all NATO countries.
And finally, what strategic approaches should European leaders prioritize to navigate this era of sustained geopolitical uncertainty?
Yeah, it is sustained, and that is the key word, because this isn't going to repair itself overnight. I believe we're going to have to introduce a form of national service in the UK, similar to that we see in Scandinavia, to keep a latent capability, a capability across all of society, not just in the Army, Air Force or Navy, but the Coast Guards, in cybersecurity as well, in defense industry, to be able to increase stockpiles suddenly, to have that capability at a moment's notice to improve our readiness if the threat does increase. That's, I'm afraid, where we are today. Instability is now going to be the new normal.
Right. Mr. Ellwood, it was such a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
We ask the question, what is needed in the world?